Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Join us right now from the great Empire State of New York. Our guest is here today to celebrate the Good Morning Book. Please welcome to the show, Robyn Polanski Morrison. Hey, Robyn, how are you?
Hey, Jed, I'm well, thank you. And you?
I'm wonderful. First, I want to give a big thank you, not only for being here with me today, but for the fact that this interview, it took some heroic efforts to make happen. I think we had to reschedule it a couple of times, and then you came on when I was in the hospital, and you interviewed with one of my interns, and there was some technical issues with that interview. But here we are today, and there's going to be no issues with this at all. We're going to have a fantastic conversation about your book and so much more. So thank you for all that patience that you gave us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about the Good Morning Book and beyond.
Yeah. So the Good Morning Book, is this the perfect book to read to your? I had a conversation with my niece yesterday who is in college, and she was talking about the fact that she hates it when anybody wakes her up by pounding on the door. Hey, you got to get up, get up. I like to be woken up gently and sweetly and peacefully. And I know my niece, I know if I were to go in there and try to wake her up in that way, she'd never get out of bed. So I understand why people bang on the door. But is this the kind of book that we take this book into our kids in the morning to say good morning and how are you and wake up?
I mean, it says from the publishers ages 0 to 7, but hey, 20 to 50 to 90 to whatever age you are, the book's intention is very much that, as a soft start to the day. When we started to talk just in preparation for this interview about how we know that in the morning, right, we have lots going on, right, whether we had good sleep or bad sleep, whether we have a long day or short day, things that we're nervous about. I mean, there's just so many variables. But when we wake up in the morning, the importance of taking a deep breath. Some people meditate, some people exercise, some people have their things. But we know that if we start those things or figuring out what helps us in the morning get our mind straight, then we're most likely going to be better off for the day. Now, there's always outliers and there's always things that happen, and we learn as we get older how to deal with those things. But the Good Morning Book is really meant as a gentle way to wake up in the morning. So the very first line, good morning to you, how is your rest? It's a brand new day, let's give it our best, is how it starts. Right. And so would your niece mind if, one of her RAs or friends kind of woke up reading a prose to her? Maybe, maybe not. But for kids that are sleepy eyed and, might want an extra second in their cribs or don't necessarily want to start their day or do the things that they're being asked to do, it takes roughly 3 minutes to read the book. Right. And so while, there are some people aghast that you want to read a book in the morning when there's lunches to be made and places to go and things to do and tasks, and to take 3 minutes to start to get in the routine and the habit with children, young children. We start from 0 to whatever age, as we say, to take a deep breath, to be mindful, to set the intention of the day. There's movement in this book. My favorite is rub your tummy, it likes things that's yummy, or I think it's tickle your elbows while touching your toes, which I have no idea where I came up with that. But just to get the body into some motion gently and kindly, and talks about brushing the teeth and the hair. So all the things that we need to do just for, I guess, good standard morning hygiene. And then it ends on a high note, which is, now we're ready to go. We can play and make friends and just greet the day with a smile. So that was a long-winded way of saying, yeah, sure. College kids could definitely read this too.
Well, I think one of the things it does, certainly with a college kid, but also with younger kids, you were mentioning that people might be aghast when there are all these important tasks to take care of, that you would take 3 minutes in the morning to read this book. I think, and I know, that we have our priorities in the wrong place. And I think that if we can help our kids understand that the most important thing that we can do in the morning is be kind to ourselves, to help remind ourselves how wonderful and beautiful and loved we are, and that we have the power to make the day, that we have the power to be in control of our lives and of our day. I think that's really not only important, I think it's very empowering, because now suddenly it's not, I got another day, I got a test, I got to do this, I got to do that. It's like, no, I'm going to choose what's going on in my life. And I do have these things, but I'm going to choose to make taking care of me my most important priority.
You make a really good point, because I do believe, like everything else, the home or the grown-ups that you're around influence and teach and model these things. And without judgment, in myself included, you get lost in the day, you get lost in the tasks. As you noted, I'm right now working in my husband's dental practice with, a day job in the book. But and so the days and the mornings get really busy and they're task oriented. But we still, most days, not perfect, start with the book, mommy's book, when my daughter wakes up, or my son before he leaves for, right now it's summertime, so before he leaves for camp. And it really, as we said, boots the brain up, right? And takes that moment to say, sit on my lap for a second, whatever else is going to happen the rest of the day. And some days, even if you boot up well, even if you start the day with a good program, I was talking about this before, our brains are like computers. If you boot it up and it's running smooth and you give it the right coding and the programming, by and large, it'll run smooth for the day. But if you're going to wake up and not take that moment to boot it up right, you never know what's going to happen. You're going to have bugs and kinks, but those happen anyway. Mm-hmm. But if we start from a place of centering, a place of mindfulness, a place of empowerment, as you said, which I actually think I had that word in the book at one point, and my editors took it out because it was a little too far of a reach, but I did keep the word mindful in there. And mindful can mean all different things to all different people. It doesn't have to be some very out there thing. It could be some very grounded thing. But anyway, you're right, the importance of starting those habits.
Yeah. Well, before we get into other questions that I really have to ask you, I love that you kept mindful in the book. I wish that the editor had allowed you to keep empower, because I understand that empower is a word that maybe most 4 or 5-year-olds don't run into every day, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't run into it. And
that's right.
3, 4, and 5-year-olds aren't reading this book on their own. They're being read to by a parent, and I have a feeling, I know my kids, if they're 5 years old, when I read them, I know my niece, if I read who's 20, if I read a book, a word to her that she doesn't know, she's going to say, what does that mean? And so it's a way to learn.
That's a good point. I think I had a bunch of words like that, and so it's the point we had to, but anyway, I will take that back to them, because perhaps there's more coming.
All right. Speaking of that, I understand that while it may not have been the direct inspiration of this book, that you, sort of a struggle that you had played an important role in this book coming to be. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and you're referring to a wicked bout of postpartum depression that I dealt with, and for full transparency, there were a lot of things that I was sick for 9+ months during my pregnancy. I had no relief. I mean, I did not have it easy with Miles. That was my firstborn, and he's now 4 and change. I had preeclampsia. I mean, there was a lot of stuff. I'm an older mom. I'm 45 and I have a 2 and a 4-year-old. So different, my body is in a different place, but I mean, just so grateful and in awe of what it did to bring those 2 little guys into the world, or 1 girl, 1 guy. And also I think it was shortly after Miles was born, these mental, anguish, right? My words and my definition and my feelings are going to be different than the next person that's experiencing postpartum depression. There was a part of me that didn't realize what was going on. I just thought it was normal to be staring out the window and struggling and just not wanting to acknowledge, yes, logically I loved this thing, but, mentally and emotionally, what was I doing? Where was I? Right. And again, there was some situational. I had just moved out of New York City and upstate. I didn't know anybody. And it was, I was in the hospital for almost 6 or 7 days because it was a really difficult birthing process. I was on magnesium. So there was some chemical action at play as well, but then my body. And so, it took us a while to realize what was happening. Cause, as women, we don't necessarily speak up and say, I'm feeling this way. Is this normal? Or, in my case, it just, it was something I had been waiting for so long. And then all of a sudden I didn't think it was going to happen. And then it did. And it's sort of like, well, wait a second. Now I have to change my whole world. I was a year before that living in New York City, working on, working at a big bank. And here I am now, very different life. And so that all the things contributed. But at the end of the day, I finally was able and lucky and so grateful to get help, in the form of not only medicine, but also talk therapy and help from the people around me, to realize. But there was a month or 2 where I didn't know what was going on, and neither did anyone around me, which just still is shocking, but it really is the truth. You can hide it well, but staring out the window and feeling forlorn. And one of the bits of advice and help that I got was to find something that you can relate to your son with, or relate to your child. And that was reading. My mom is a children's librarian. And so just, I guess through osmosis, right, I love children's books. And we would go out every weekend and just collect, and one time we had to put ourselves on a restriction. We can only bring home 2 at a time or something like that from the library, from the bookstore. And I was given the advice to just read everything, right? At the time, maybe it was 4 or 5 months. I read magazines and news articles and the mail, and if I was making dinner, the ingredients on a package. I just kept reading and reading and reading. And one morning I was reading to Miles, and I said, Miles, we have 1,000 books to put us to go nighttime, right? That is a very typical routine. But where are the morning books? And I started to do a little research, and I found a couple. Margaret Weiss Brown wrote one, that's of Cow Jumping Over the Moon fame, or Goodnight Moon fame. And there was a couple others. Some of them are more religious and faith-based. Some of them are language-based. But I could not find one. I think Sandra Boynton has one. So some of the usual suspects, as I just mentioned. But that was it. And so I wrote one. Awesome. Plain and simple. I wrote it and I put it away. And I was like, this was fun, but I read it to him a few times, but I'm like, what am I going to do? I don't know how to, this is a whole different world. I went to a friend of mine locally who was an independent publisher, and it sort of got blown into this, we have to think about this marketing and this publishing and this distribute. And I was like, whoa, wait a second. I'm working out postpartum. I'm figuring out my career, my life. So I put it away. And then a couple years later, my daughter Ren was born, and we had at that point settled into a home. And it was, of course, it was mid-pandemic. So that was a whole different thing. But I also had a different to go back to the word, I had a different empowerment. I had a different confidence level. And I took it out and I did my research. I found a hybrid publisher, and the rest is history.
That's wonderful. Going back to your experience with postpartum depression, I think that's something that I had heard of, you know, and I knew that it affected folks. Thankfully, my beautiful wife didn't experience it, as far as I know, in the birth of our kids. But there is a lot of women do experience this. Any idea what percentage of moms might experience this?
You know, it's so funny you asked me that, because I think the first time when we were scheduled, I looked up all these numbers and then
and I blew it.
It's gotten a little busy. So I think it is a larger percent than we realize. Mm-hmm. Let me see if I could find that number. Postpartum. I know I put it somewhere. Here we go. CDC study shows that 1 in 10 women in the United States report some type of symptom. And there's a risk assessment that, you know, more recently that it's 1 in 8 women. And I'm sure that there are tons of different studies out there, candidly. The operative part of that statistic is it's a lot. Right? And whether it's chalked up as hormonal rebalancing or life or whatever, it is a real thing. And actually, I'm glad you mentioned it, because I did talk about it as much as I could once I knew what was going on. And I was both shocked as well as relieved at the number of people in my life, daily life, and in my extended life that did not really know what postpartum was. I mean, I had some people say, "What's that?" Mm-hmm. And for something that is so common and so challenging for women, for new moms, that then they would say, "Okay, I've never heard of that, but what is it?" Like wanting to know, mm-hmm. wanting to understand, which was a relief, because there's already so many obstacles for new moms in this country, right? And dealing with mental health, we know, is a challenge for so many more people than ever before. And so, it's a lot.
Yeah. Well, I do remember that one of the reasons, after we had scheduled it to come on, I was excited about it because, there had just been a real tragedy here in the Boston area of a mom.
Oh, I think I remember this.
Mom who was experiencing deep postpartum depression, and the horrendous thing that drove her to do. And I think that those are very, very rare occurrences. But I think it's important that we understand that there are, as you said, 1 in 10, that's 10% of the people who are pregnant. That's a very significant percentage of people. And if it's 1 in 8, I don't do math.
That's my point, is that it's a high number,
right.
Whatever study you're looking at. Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's important for us, I mean, if there's some little way in our, you know, within this little podcast that we can help people become more aware of it, as we have, but also just, you know, is there something we can do? It's something we can look for in our friends, in our family members who are expecting, who have just delivered.
Because there is something. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off for a second. There is something called prepartum, which is during the gestational period. There is a form of depression and fear and anxiety that is legitimate, right? So there's a lot going on, right? I think that at least for me, teen pregnancy was the biggest challenge growing up, right? And mm-hmm. so it just, to me, I thought that birthing a child was like no big deal, but it is a serious medical situation. It is God willing, it becomes one of the greatest joys and blessings and all those things. But in the meantime, your body is going through I don't even know what the right medical term is, but change. Mm-hmm. And so I'm so sorry to cut you off, but I have a lot of thoughts on this. But also, Jed, remember, this is me and my experience, right? There are so many wonderful trained professionals out there that but again, it is to the point of the horrendous event, that, you know, you read about from time to time. Like it's also not surprising, because it is easy as a woman to brush things under the carpet, and then it is a mental condition where your body, your mind, takes over, right? And so that is a fear. So there's a couple things. So, first of all, typically when you go for your follow-up visits with your gynecologist, OBGYN, there's a survey that you fill out that will give you questions like, how are you feeling? How often do you feel like, you know, not smiling? I don't remember the exact questions, but then you add up the numbers, and if you're under a certain number, you're in the clear. If you're over a certain number, your OBGYN might suggest that you're going through something, and that maybe maybe medicine. And I think that if that is the case, and a partner or a spouse or a family member knows that there is that threshold where your number is high, that immediately seek formal help, right? OBGYNs are amazing individuals, and they are there to bring life and to make sure your life is good. And then there is a whole nother set of mental health professionals that can take on the next journey for somebody. So I would say, for those who don't know that survey exists, friends, family, grown-ups, everybody, maybe inquire if that's something, you know, you can't get that information because of all the HIPAA rules, but inquire, say, hey, you know, what about that survey? Was there anything there that you wanted to talk about? So that's the first thing to bring to light. The second thing is, and this is more, I don't know if it's cultural, you know, in this country, we can talk endlessly. It's probably a whole nother podcast conversation about, and not relevant here, but to maternity leave and the way that corporate America treats new moms, whether you've birthed your child or whether you've adopted or surrogacy or whatever it is, in a way that, quite honestly, is so backwards. But the other part of that is also, whether it is in jest or in truth, there is such a focus on that newborn baby, to the detriment, to the challenge, to the loneliness of the new mom. Right? So, when I went through birthing classes, right, the OBGYN's job is to get that child to arrive safely. Everybody else's job in that room is to make sure you're okay. But that's like almost secondary, right? And I'm not saying this is, again, the case. This was my experience. This was my situation. But I had so many people, you know, joke with me on day 3 of being a mom, oh, you don't matter anymore. This kid is you know, and so even if it's said in jest, each little time that happens, that there's something, whether you are the strongest, most independent person, right? And so I would say that as a people, as a culture, whether you're a close friend or relative or whatever, ask the mom how they're doing, but not just how they're doing. Say, hey, can I bring you over a coffee today and take you outside for a walk? Or, hey, can I come over and throw a load of laundry in and just check in with you? Hey, can I bring over lunch for everybody? Hey, can I write your checks out for whatever it is? Because the hi, how are you? If somebody is going through something, it's going to be fine, okay. But if you say to somebody, can I do something for you specific to that person? Hey, can I come wash bottles? Can I come restock your diaper? Like, can I pick up some whatever it is, it's the littlest tasks. It doesn't need to be onerous, but it's asking the mom or saying to the mom, hey, can I give you a half an hour to go take a walk or take a shower? But suggest it, because as a new mom, even me with every bit of resource and help, I didn't want to ask. Mm-hmm. Like, I thought I could do this, and I didn't know I was hurting. So that's the second thing. Again, whether you're close or far, ask specifically, not just how are you, but hey, what is it like? And the third thing I would say, which is going to be slightly unpopular, and my husband and I have talked about this a lot, I mean, not necessarily wanting to put this out there for perpetuity, but, you know, you go through pregnancy. For my case, I was sick for a while. Are we frozen or are we good?
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay. You go through this process, your body changes, your life changes, and then you have this tiny human in your hands, and your motion towards this human, in my case, I labored for 42 hours and then was converted to a cesarean section. And that's a whole different story. And now all of a sudden, like, I have this thing in my hands, and I don't recognize my body. I don't recognize my life. And there's supposed to be an exchange of love. And this is supposed to be the happiest moment in my life. Birthing is traumatic. Mm-hmm. Like, yes, it is wonderful and all those things, but we also have to help new moms understand that you can have this traumatic health event and have fears and have anxieties and have all those things that maybe we don't want to say out loud, and also hold love or get to know your baby, right? Like, you meet somebody, you and I just met, we're becoming friends. It takes a minute, right? So yes, this tiny human can't speak and you have to do everything for them, but they're a tiny human too. You got to get to know them, mm-hmm. right? And yes, there's love, but it takes time. And I don't think we talk about that enough, right? Or the love isn't always automatic. And if it's not, we're made to feel like that's horrible. Mm-hmm. And it's not an exciting time when you're gutted and your world changes. It takes a minute. So, I would say then from there, it's to be as, supportive as a friend, as a parent, as a cousin, as a whomever in that person's life, and not maybe ascribe moments like, this is the most exciting time, or this is the most beautiful thing, or, put time on them, put time on the new moms. The babies have all the attention in the world. So not always the most popular thing, but like I said, it would be looking at that survey and asking and showing up and asking what the mom could do, and also not ascribing an emotion to the event for somebody else. Yeah, you can be like, I'm so happy for you. It must be, all the emotions. But this is how I would approach it. So sorry for that long-winded answer.
No, but I love it. I love it. And I can relate to a couple of things. Well, I can imagine first 42 hours of labor. That the minute you said that, it blew my mind. So, I can't relate to it, but I can imagine what that was like. The other thing is that whole idea of offering, can I give you a half an hour? And that resonates for me in a big way now, because I was just an infant for a couple of months after my accident. I was bedridden and there wasn't a whole lot I could do for myself, and my wife was taking care of me. And I know that when I spoke to my daughter and I said, can you take mom out to dinner? It was huge for my wife. It was so important. And she didn't want to go. She set up the security camera in my bedroom to make sure that I didn't fall out of the bed, because it was so, and I know now.
It's the same thing.
Exactly. So, be there for, I'm so happy that you're honest and that you're sharing this, because I think it's very, very important. And it's so amazing, another just testament to the power of reading, that here you were in the midst of this crisis, medical crisis, and one of the medicines, one of the cures that they prescribed for you was to read, and read with your kid. So that's awesome. We've talked about a lot, so we don't want to overload everybody. Where can we go? In the meantime, where can people go to find out more about the morning book and find out more about Robyn Polanski Morrison?
Thank you. So we have a website. It's thegoodmorningbook.com. And the book is available on all the major outlets, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. My publisher is Blue Balloon Books. Where else is it available? On my website, Target, Walmart. I'm very lucky that Ingram as a distributor liked the idea. We have some in the local stores, but we are working on doing some projects come the fall in schools, particularly kindergarten, nursery schools, doing some readings. And, I didn't quite realize sort of the excitement behind meeting an author and what that all means. And so I've done some programs locally here and starting to do some stuff down in New York City, coming in, there's all sorts of, baby yoga classes. So we've done some starting with a stretch and a book and maybe a sensory activity, but taking this now, what my friend wanted it to be all those years ago when Miles was born, to having some good time with it. And I've heard a lot of feedback from teachers that it's also a really nice way to start the day.
Yeah.
When kids come into their classroom, you don't know where they're coming from. After a while, you don't know what kind of morning they had, and they need centering and they need a deep breath. So it can work in schools too. So, that is the long way of answering. The book is available on my website and all other information. Because as I was telling you, this book is a labor of love and a side hustle, as I like to say, or a hobby job. I'm a trained economist, and I'm in the investment world, during the proverbial day. So, this really has been a lot of fun for me, a labor of love. And when I think about where I want to spend my time, I always love, I've done a couple of, artisan fairs this summer so far. And I've had, so many wonderful conversations with people who love literature, who love kids' books, who, will sit there and read it and say, wow, maybe I can bring this into my classroom with, autistic children, right, or differently abled children. Because also, as I mentioned, when my publisher connected me with the illustrator, I was very specific that all of the characters in the book had all different shapes, sizes, capabilities, and everything in between. Even down to one of the scenes, there's a window with an urban setting. One of the scenes, there's a window with a suburban setting. And the hope is that children and college kids alike, and anybody that picks up the book, might see a bit of them or somebody close to them in the book. Mostly kids, there's no grown-ups. And that was also on purpose, because as I'm learning, as I'm becoming a mom and meeting other kids, there's grown-ups. There might not be a designated mom or a designated dad, but there's grown-ups in our lives that are important. And so really trying to make this book as accessible and reachable, and not being too out there, but allowing it to go where it needs to go. Wonderful.
We've had a really eye-opening time speaking to the author of The Good Morning Book. And we're so happy she made the investment of her time into this book, and we hope that you will invest at least some of your time to check the book out. Our guest has been the author, Robyn Polanski Morrison. Hey, Robyn, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, that is my pleasure. Thank you so much for your interest and for your great questions, and for allowing me to be as candid as possible.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and will join us for the next exciting episode. If you want to make sure you don't miss a second of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitch Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. And also be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com and download your copy of the Reading with Your Kids online magazine. It's free. It's available at readingwithyourkids.com. Just click on our blog. Before you go, I want to make sure that I give a big thank you to my team: Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison Dairies, Soji Franklin, Monica Rivera Sosa, Ann O'Leary. I want to give a big thank you to my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, and most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.